No matter which type of deployment you choose for installing ESXi, the first thing that you're going to do is go to VMware.com to download it. Now, before we do that, I want to first review our scenario here with the Wired Brain Coffee Company. For this module, what you as a consultant will help the administrator at the Wired Brain Coffee Company do is to download VMware ESXi and install it interactively. After that installation is complete, you'll help to ensure that common initial configurations are made, including a static IP address, which you would always do in production, DNS configuration, NTP or network time protocol configuration, SSH or secure shell access, and centralized logging using a syslog server. Once these things are configured, you'll verify that you can log in successfully to your brand new ESXi host at the Wired Brain Coffee Company. And with that, let's get started by downloading ESXi. Here at VMware.com, there are multiple paths to get to the vSphere download page, but I typically go here to Downloads and then to VMware vSphere. That will bring you to the Download VMware vSphere page, and it's here that you have a few options. You can choose to get a free trial. However, vSphere will install with an evaluation period, but I do encourage you, if this is the first time you've done this, to use the option to get a free trial. It's completely free. It's a short form. You'll get additional resources and download VMware vSphere at the same time. Now, if you are purchasing VMware vSphere, you'll get your license key via email or through the vSphere license portal. Or if you already have existing keys, or you just want to use the built-in vSphere license period like we want to, then you can simply scroll down here and select the edition of vSphere that corresponds to what you'll be using. Now, to be honest with you, the vSphere hypervisor ESXi version 7.0 on every one of these is identical. So as long as you're getting the vSphere hypervisor version 7.0, it honestly does not matter which edition of vSphere you choose. I typically go down here to vSphere Enterprise Plus because I like to look at all the additional packages that make up vSphere Enterprise Plus, including vCenter, Replication, vRealize Orchestrator, vRealize Operations, NSXT, and more. So to get the vSphere hypervisor, we'll click on Go to Downloads on the right-hand side. And you do have to use your free VMware login. If you don't have one, you can click here to sign up now. Again, it's completely free and it just takes a minute to fill out a simple form. I'll put in my username and password here and click sign in. And then we're brought here to the download product page. Of course, you can click to read the release notes and get additional information on what's new, compatibility, what's changed, known issues. That's always recommended. But if you scroll down, the very first option here is VMware vSphere Hypervisor ESXi ISO image, 350 megabytes. It's an ISO file. I'll click download now. I'll agree to the terms, click accept, and we are downloading VMware vSphere. With my connection, it looks like this will take about 7 to 9 seconds. And once that is downloaded, we have a few different options to get it to our ESXi host. Now, if we're using a virtual host, let's say in VMware Fusion, if I open up VMware Fusion, if we want to run ESXi virtually, let's say in our lab environment, it's very easy to choose the image that you downloaded, the ISO right here, by choosing a disk or disk image in this case. You'll connect it, and then when you boot up your virtual machine in VMware Fusion, you will boot that ISO file. That's the ESXi installer right there that we will be booting here in just a moment on our physical host. Now, to get it on a physical host, we have a few options. Again, we could use a CD/DVD image burning tool to burn that ISO image to a physical CD or DVD media. And then we could insert that into a CD/DVD drive on our physical server where we will be installing ESXi. Some servers have a drive already built into them. Other times you can connect a USB DVD drive and install ESXi that way. Another tool that I've commonly used in Windows is called Rufus ISO Image Burning Tool. This will take you to rufus.ie, and this is a really great tool that very easily allows you to burn ISO images to a USB flash drive. And that's actually what I've done in this case. Using my Windows desktop, I downloaded the free Rufus tool, which is just super tiny, 1.1 megabytes, and I burned the ISO image that I downloaded from VMware.com onto a 4 gigabyte USB flash drive and physically stuck that in the USB port on the back of the server. As I mentioned earlier, you have other options. You can also Pixie boot this over the network, and we'll be doing that later in our vSphere Auto Deploy module. Honestly, it doesn't matter how you get this ISO image to the server as long as you get it there. In fact, I'll tell you even another option for getting it over to the server. Over here in Firefox, I've opened up the IPMI tool, the web-based management tool for this server. This is built into the hardware of this Supermicro server, and it allows me to use virtual media. So here I can actually put this media over on an SMB file share, and the IPMI tool will mount this as a CD-ROM image. So that's another alternative for accessing the ISO media. Now, in our case, we're actually going to use this tool for remote control. So I'll open up the integrated KVM tool, and I'll perform a power on of this physical server. You can see the console there, and we'll need to bring up the virtual keyboard because at just the right time, we're going to push F11, and that will bring up the boot menu so that we can select the USB flash drive that we inserted into the server with the ESXi ISO image on it. All right, we'll push F11 there to invoke the boot menu. And then here's all the different devices we have available to boot this host. We're going to use the arrow keys on the virtual keyboard and go down to the UEFI USB disk 5.0 that I've inserted into the back of this host, which I burned, in this case, with the Rufus tool. However, it doesn't matter how you get that image, again, to a USB flash drive. There are other tools on Mac or on Windows or on Linux that make that possible. The point is that the VMware ISO is here on the server. So I'm going to push enter, and here we start to see that we're loading the ESXi installer. So we're going to go through the standard VMware ESXi installer boot up process here. This looks very similar to actually booting a host, but you can see that it says it's loading the ESXi installer. This will take just a moment to complete. And now we get the traditional VMware yellow console screen. And you can see there, it says VMware ESXi version 7.0. And it's running, in this case, on a Supermicro Sys E208D. You can see that we have an Intel Xeon D1528 1.9 gigahertz CPU with 63.9 gigabytes of memory. Let's just round it off and call it 64 gigs of memory. It'll take a few minutes to load up all the different modules that make up the ESXi hypervisor. And with that, it says, welcome to VMware ESXi 7.0.0 installation. So at this point, we can simply click enter, and that will start the installation process. Here we'll need to push F11 to accept the end user license agreement and continue. On my Mac keyboard, that's actually function F11, but on a Windows PC, it should just be F11. We're scanning for available devices to install the ESXi hypervisor. And here we have a number of choices. So this server has a 120 gigabyte flash drive. It also has a roughly 500 gigabyte SSD drive. And then it has a 32 gigabyte, in this case, it says 28.6 gigabyte USB flash drive. And then finally, the USB disk that we booted the ESXi installer on. In our case, we're going to install this on the SanDisk Cruiser, which is the 32 gigabyte USB flash drive. Here on the console, of course, it reads as 28.65. And that will leave the two other drives, the two other SSD drives for our vSAN cluster. So we can create an all-flash vSAN cluster with the cache drive and the capacity drive. So we'll select the SanDisk Cruiser in this case, but in your case, it's going to be whatever the primary disk is that you want to install ESXi on. Now, because I've already installed ESXi on this drive during my testing, it's asking us if we want to do an upgrade or if we want to do a fresh installation. We'll choose a fresh installation. We'll rewrite the installation that's already there. However, your installation may or may not ask this question if you've never installed ESXi on your primary disk before. Next, I'll select the keyboard layout. In my case, it's US default. And then I'll enter a root password for this host. And finally, here's the last question before we confirm installation. Do we want to install ESXi 7.0 on this specific disk? It gives us a warning that that disk will be repartitioned, which means erased and overwritten. We'll push F11 to confirm, and that starts the installation. Now, ESXi isn't very big, honestly, about 300 megabytes on the ISO. It doesn't take very long to install, but it can take a minute or two. So we may need to speed up the recording process a little bit. And with that, ESXi 7.0 is successfully installed. Notice that it says it will operate in evaluation mode for 60 days. After that period, you must register for a VMware product license. Now, it tells us to administer this server, we should navigate to the server's hostname or IP address from our web browser, or use the DCUI, which is the Direct Console User Interface. And we should remove any installation media before rebooting. We'll press enter to reboot. This will take just a few minutes. We'll speed up the process, and then I'll show you how to use that Direct Console User Interface. All right, this is the first boot of ESXi. Let's cross our fingers, but I'm confident that everything will boot up just fine. And there we go. You can see it says VMware ESXi version 7.0. It is booting up. Let's give it just a moment to load the VM kernel. And just like that, our ESXi host is successfully booted for the first time. Now, notice a few things from here. You can see the version of ESXi version 7.0, the brand and model of the host, the type of CPU, the amount of memory, the IP address to manage this host via your web browser right there was received via DHCP. So now we're going to push F2, and we're going to go ahead and log in as root and then enter that password that we specified in the installation. And this brings us to what they call the DCUI, or the Direct Console User Interface. It's here that we can configure a new root password. We can configure our networking, restart the management network, test the management network, perform network restore options, troubleshooting, view system logs, view support information, and reset the system configuration. Now, in our case, we're going to configure the management network. We'll go into network adapters, and you can see here we have 4 network adapters. Only one of them is connected to the network, and that one is selected. So that's good. We can go down to IP4 configuration, and what we're going to do is to configure a static IP address on this host. We'll call this 192.168.1.11. We'll keep the default subnet mask and gateway. I'll push enter there. We'll go down to the DNS configuration, and we're going to statically configure our primary DNS server to a DNS server that I've already got running on the network, and then configure an alternate DNS server as well. We'll also configure the host name for this node. It's going to simply be node 1, and then a custom DNS suffix, and it's going to be wiredbraincoffee.com. I'll push enter on that. We'll push escape to go back a level. We'll say yes, that we want to restart the management network services. And then we're brought back here. You can see the host name and the IP address have changed. I'll go ahead and exit out of this. And you can see right there on the console, this is now known as node 1. And its IP address is 192.168.1.11. And it's a static IP address. And we'll be using this in our next lesson, where I show you how to access the console of this ESXi host from your web browser.